Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Dallas Geek. As always, I'm Brad. Mike is off in the ether. And we are here today with I think, an amazing guest. One of my favorite authors, Claudia Gray. And all the Star Wars fans out there, I would hope, knows her name. If not, we're going to fix that today.
All right.
So, Claudia, how you doing?
I am doing really well. The Christmas last-minute prep is beginning to take over the house. I had to go get more wrapping paper at TJ Maxx this morning. It was like something out of Mad Max Fury Road. I swear. You just had to get out with some wrapping paper alive.
Oh, yes. I understand that one. I made the mistake of trying to go get just a couple things from the grocery store the day before Thanksgiving, and it did not go well. No. Thankfully, I got out of there much faster than my father-in-law did when he had to go to Costco the same day, and the line was literally to the back of the store. Wow. So
yeah, it's bonkers out there.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, so thank you, of course, for joining us. And of course, as much as I would love to talk about this and this and all your other Star Wars books, I think for our audience members out there who have not yet gotten acquainted with you, I think the best thing to do is kind of start pre-Star Wars. Especially since, from what I can tell, that's what got you the Star Wars gig in the first place. And more in particular, your, let's say, deep-seated love, it seems like, for the fantasy romance genre.
Yeah, that is part of it. Yeah, I mean, first of all, just anybody who Disney's going to get to write Star Wars has to have an independent writing background beforehand. You know, they need to know your work, that you're able to hit deadlines and deal with edits and handle yourself at events, you know, that kind of stuff. They need you to have that track record. Certainly back when I was starting out, or before I was starting out, you know, I wanted to go right to writing for like Star Wars or Star Trek, and it was just like, no, that's not how that's going to work. But yeah, I had written a lot of young adult paranormal and science fantasy, which had, all of them had romantic elements, some more emphatically than others. You know, the Firebird series is very, very romantic. The Constellation series is a little more of a slow burn. But yeah, I got to do these things. And as it happened, Star Wars was wanting to try to get into young adult. And one of the editors there had known me for a long time and knew how I wrote. And she knew I was a huge Star Wars fan. And she also knew I could write fast, because that matters. And so she reached out to me, and I submitted an outline, and that's how I got started on this road.
Speaking of the Constellation series that you did, so this looks like this was one of your more prolonged forays into science fiction prior to Star Wars.
It actually wasn't prior to. I think Defy the Stars came out 2016, 2017, one of those years. Okay. And Lost Stars was 2015. But before that, I had done, it wasn't space, but it was science fantasy. The Firebird series is about a girl chasing her father's killer through alternate dimensions. So I got to, and there is a universe where she winds up being in space. I got to dip my toes in there.
Yeah, looking over that, because obviously I haven't had the chance to be able to read that book yet, but the synopsis does feel at least somewhat inspired by A Stitch in Time. Were you inspired at all?
What do you, A Stitch in Time?
Why am I blanking on the name? Disney.
You mean the Madeline L'Engle book?
The Disney just made a remake of it with Chris Pine and young girl dimension hopping, trying to find her father.
I don't know that one. So yeah, no, that I can tell you exactly where it came from if you are interested.
Yes, please.
I was on a book tour, and I was going all around the U.S., and it was one of these that had been set up so you were literally in Minnesota one day, and then you were in Miami, and then you were in New York, and then you were in Nevada, but I had two other authors on the tour with me, and it was like you were waking up at this completely different place every single day, different weather, different surroundings, etc. But Dan Wells and Lauren Oliver were always there. And I actually left from the last event on the trip, which was in LA, and went out to Australia to do a tour. And that was very different. And, you're in Melbourne, you're in Sydney, you're in Perth, and everything is very different there. And the only constant was my publicist going with me. And something about the idea of different worlds, same people started to generate on that trip. And so that is where that came from. That, and it's a little bit of A Wrinkle in Time, which is not about dimension hopping.
That's what I was thinking of.
She goes to different worlds, not quite different dimensions. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit of that. But
it's been years since I've read it. But it
it's a
did have some similarities from what I could remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more like the scientist parents and kind of the relationship that Marguerite has is very much like the relationship that Meg has with her parents.
Nice. So how'd you go from something like that to vampire romance high school?
Mm-hmm. It's the other direction. Started with the vampires first.
Okay.
In all honesty, like when I was a little kid, first of all, I see Star Wars for the first time the summer I turned 7.
Sure.
And I always say that's a really great age to have your relationship to reality severed. It's over. And from that time on, I was always really interested in genre type things. And that could be anything. Do you remember those old Reader's Digest books? You may be too young for them, but it was like strange stories, amazing facts, or tales of the unexplained. Yes. And it would just be the most, completely bizarre collection of things. It'd be everything from like cryogenics to the Jersey Devil. Like, could it be an episode of the X-Files? I am probably interested in that. So, to me, those things do not feel like they're in vastly different realms. I've always been interested in all these kinds of things. And for me, luckily, Evernight got started because I had been a big fan of Buffy and Angel. And so I wound up writing something that involved teenagers and vampires that got to New York the week that they, publishers were saying, this thing called Twilight is selling, And it's actually a little embarrassing because sometimes you're on panels that are like, how many books did you have to write before you got published? And I'm like, one. And it's not because the book was so great. I still had a lot to learn, but I happened to show up with something people wanted at a moment when they really wanted it and there wasn't much else out there. And I got lucky. But any creative artist who's being honest with you will tell you luck is both good and bad is a part of every career.
Yes.
And that was a big stroke of good luck for me, and it's just been about hanging on from there.
Well, I will say that seeing how well your Evernight series has done, and seeing how that was one of the, I guess, earlier big successes in your career, and then it's
Yes.
only just gone from there, I'm sure is going to give a lot of young writers a lot of hope, because I know for a fact that there is more than a little bit of fan fiction online that is exclusively within the romantic fantasy area, regardless of if the source material was or wasn't.
Yeah.
So to know that that genre is able to prepare you for something else, something bigger, and it can be taken seriously, is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't take up fanfic like as practice for a writing career. It took me a long time to even think that might be a possibility.
Yeah.
But if you take it seriously, I mean, you know, with the caveat that you are, of course, you know, sometimes writing, because sometimes it may be romantic or it may be very silly, and there's parody fics and etc. But I did work on it. And I also think that one of the biggest elements of learning to write is learning who you are as a writer. You know, what makes you productive, what helps you work with an idea and develop it. You know, how do you best edit, etc. You have to figure these things out. And certainly writing fanfic can teach you that. I've actually thought about trying to put together an online course about going pro-fic to fanfic and talking about some of the things that I didn't learn from fanfic that you just need to be aware of if you're going there. Like a big one is just the connective tissue of the book. Fanfic, you can really kind of either just do the really fun scene, or you can just kind of get from there to there and nobody cares. In a book, people care. They're going to notice. You have to not only get from point A to point B, you have to make that link feel vital and interesting in itself. I won't get into more detail because that's getting into little nuts and bolts, but still, it taught me a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and that's honestly one of the things that I think your writing style really shows, as far as when you're trying to dissect it and figure out what is it about this that just keeps bringing me back to another one of your books, and another one, and another one. It's, as you put it, that connective tissue. It just flows so seamlessly from start to finish, and is actually one of the things that seems to, at least to me, help you develop your characters to such an extent they feel real. They like, the world feels lived in. They feel like actual people and not just characters that are in a book that are trying to get to the end of the plot.
Well, thank you. That's the goal. That's everything you dream of. And you know, it's something that I respond to a lot as a fan. Full disclosure, I am right now resisting talking about Andor, and I will attempt to resist throughout this interview, but I do not promise that I will succeed. I've really not been able to talk about anything else at length for more than a calendar year now. So
very nice.
And I regret it.
Yeah, no, I will say, if you're talking the on-screen Star Wars, there have been so many people that I've known this past year that's been the thing that's just become their obsession. Like, they keep saying the writing's amazing, the acting's amazing. It's just quintessential Star Wars. And, you know, my co-host and I have maybe been on a bit of a chosen boycott, strictly on the principle that, yeah, it may be a good show, but it's about a character that we already know is short term. Come on.
Why do you deprive
us
yourself joy? Why do you deprive yourself? Like, I'm not kidding. It's another level. And it's not even like just good Star Wars good. It's like Better Call Saul good, you know, or Breaking Bad good. It's operating on that level. My husband and I have literally watched every episode more than 20 times, and we're not done. And but the thing is, we're still discovering layers. And I'm not talking about things you make up as a fan, like, oh, that could mean that, etc. I mean, stuff that's definitely there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's so layered and textured. And the thing that I was thinking about, you were talking about, it doesn't seem like the characters are just trying to get from point A to point B. They have a life, you know. And there's a scene where Cassian's mother, Marva, somebody's chastising her because she hasn't really been taking care of herself. And she hasn't told anybody she's not doing well. And Bix says, you know, you could tell us. And Marva just says, my mother was a whiner, and that'll cure you. Which is both a very funny line, but in that 1 minute you get all this texture. Marva Andor is not a person who exists only to worry about her son. She is herself. She has a history. She has a personality, you know, and you get this, and it tells you a lot about her person, about her character. This is not somebody who dwells on self-pity at all. She's very brisk. She's very determined. And that's really beautiful. I don't know that I've accomplished anything that beautiful, but that kind of writing, I should see. I will also say, like, there is the thing that you know what happens to him. The way that they work with that, both thematically and musically, interestingly enough, is, I think, ingenious. Anyway, stop leading half a life. Give it a shot. You're not going to believe it.
In fairness, it is on my list now. I've finally given into it. As soon as I can finish the 6 shows I'm trying to complete right now, because we got some reviews coming up.
Yeah.
But no, I do. The more I've gotten to see the other work from the directors that they brought in on the show, and just the level of talent of the writers. There, I do have to say that is, or seems to be, one of the things that Disney has gotten very, very good at, is finding the necessary talent from behind the camera that's able to understand how it all gets made and the way to do it so that it connects with people, which very much
I feel
the
like
same way that books work, and knowing that you have to have a good writer, but also a great editor and a publisher that understands what it is that you're trying to write, as far as the type of story.
Interestingly, like Andor, another way you know the show has its head on right, they spent something like more than half of their budget on Rick's Road on Ferrex. They spent so much on it, and they found locales for the rest that were going to be a lot more inexpensive, etc. And the sense, again, of like texture and history that you get on that one set. It's like just having the intelligence to know that at the beginning, you know, it shows a lot. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I could talk about Andor for so long.
Very nice. But since we are on the topic of Star Wars, that leads us into what I'm sure a lot of people are wanting to know. How did you get Star Wars? Like, was this something you were pursuing? Did they just come to you? Because, I mean, you did say you're a fan, but I know that you don't, especially for your first one, you don't always get the choice to be able to say whether they come to you or not. They just appear, from what I've heard.
In my particular case, you know, like I said, one of the editors there was somebody I had known back since Alt TV X-Files Creative, which is back in the day of the 2400 baud modem, you know, on America Online. And so we were, we had been friends through that experience, but she had gone up and become an editor and I'd become a writer. I still didn't think we would ever work together because at the time, Star Wars had never done anything like what I had practiced writing. But, it wasn't only that she knew me or even that she knew I was a fan. She knew how I handled canon in fan fiction, which, I wrote some big alternate universe things, but I also wrote a lot of things that I wanted to slot very seamlessly into the story that existed. And so she had seen me do that and knew that I could handle that. And also, while I've been a huge Star Wars fan, she's like, sometimes the people who are really big fans who are fixated on a particular thing have some trouble writing it because they want it to be only about that thing and they don't kind of get the whole world. And she knew that both the way I'd written other things and the way that I watched and enjoyed Star Wars, she knew that I was going to be able to achieve that kind of balance. But yeah, the email came out of the clear blue. I did not anticipate it happening until, the day it did.
Oh, sure. And how much pressure was there with this being not only your first entry into Star Wars, but the fact that yours was one of the two main books that were brought in for their Journey to the Force Awakens promo? Like, what did that add any extra pressure on you when you're trying to write it to know that it's going to be so prominently featured, or did that not even phase you because you were so focused on writing?
In all honesty, I was not intimidated at all, largely because even though I had read tons and tons of the old EU, I did not understand how many people read Star Wars books. I just didn't. And also I felt really good about the story. I liked it. I knew that it was holding together. So I didn't really have a sense of the scale of it while I was working on it, which is great. It was very, very carefree, honestly, in a lot of ways. And I had started work on Bloodline before Lost Stars was even out. So, those two books I got to kind of create without the full impact of it. And I'm very, very glad of that. I think it would have been very intimidating, and you can't afford to second guess yourself with a lot of this stuff. But no, I just blithely plowed right along. There really is nothing more enjoyable than unearned confidence. It's just the best.
Nice. So that actually does bring up something that I'm not entirely sure a lot of people are aware of. So it sounds like between the time that you finished Lost Stars and the time it came out, there was a bit of a decent length gap that you were able to actually start another book in the during that time. Rather than, you're working on that one book all the way up to the point of final release. So
yeah,
how much of a gap do you usually get before your book comes out compared to when you actually finished?
In Star Wars, it's shorter than it is with other things. For other books, like my young adult books or the mystery stuff I'm working on now, it's slightly under a calendar year, usually. Okay. And you'll occasionally look at a couple of line edits there, work on some jacket copy. But for the most part, you are done. The writing process is done, and it's in the hands of the layout people, the printer, etc. With Star Wars, it's shorter. It can be as brief as like 3 to 4 months. So Star Wars, you get a few months. In the case of Lost Stars, it was a little longer actually than it usually is. I remember I finished it right around the end of the year. And we would have gotten done with edits in the spring sometime. In fact, I know the day that I handed in the final draft, because the last scene originally, or the big, not the last scene, the penultimate scene, sort of the big climax of the story, originally took place just in space. And then they're like, listen, if you work with the timeline a little bit and have it crash onto this planet called Jakku, we can actually tie it to the movie. And I said, great, so I did that. And like the day of, or the day after I handed it in, was the day that second trailer debuted. And it's the one where a Ray's speeder is going across and you see that crash Star Destroyer with the John Williams music. Like, I will never have a better fanish moment than that. It was just like, what? I wrote this and now I see it. This is incredible. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's how long that was. Bloodline was very, very tight. By the time the outline was approved, it was less than 2 months from start to finish to write. And
gotcha.
Yeah, that was quick.
So something else that I know has come up in previous author interviews who have worked with Star Wars, and just other insider stories from the Lucasfilm Story Group. It's already been well established that Pablo Hidalgo is, the lore master. He has the story Bible that everybody's supposedly supposed to see and stick to.
He is the story Bible.
So when you got brought in to write for Lost Stars, how much did he or anybody else in their story group interact with you in order to try to either guide the story or put in parameters for don't cross this line, compared to just let you run with it and then come back with comments during the edit?
First of all, just a little bit of praise. Like, I am a Pablo fangirl, which is a little awkward because we are work colleagues, but he, not only does he know the stuff, it's one thing to know the stuff, but it's another thing to understand how it works dramatically, and Pablo does. He has a great sense of story. So if you hand in a scene and he's like, listen, that ship wouldn't be able to do that thing, so this scene would happen that way. But I see what you're going for. Could you switch to that ship, which would do this, etc.? Like, he sees what it is. He doesn't just go, this is wrong. That doesn't help you. He, the best edits are not the ones that point out problems, but help you find solutions. And he does that very well. So that is all really great. That said, there was not that much on Lost Stars to change, because it frames the original trilogy, which, very well established, and I knew it very well. The primary characters are all original, and their homeworld was original, etc. So there was very little. The only thing was that I had Darth Vader's flagship being somewhere it wasn't. And they're like, you can't do that ship there. And I was like, it's an imaginary ship that exists in our heads. And they're like, yeah, and it's somewhere else. I just hadn't run into that before. And again, that's another thing fanfic doesn't prepare you for, because in fanfic, you'd be like, I can kill anybody, I can bring them back, they can all go to the Old West or open a coffee shop or whatever,
Sure.
And it was like, oh no, like, we got to work around that. So that was pretty minor. And at this point, like, through working with it, I've learned to ask questions at the very, very beginning before I even begin really generating story.
Sure.
The joke always tells, like, can I have the huts? How much hut? Little hut, lot of hut, etc. They'll be like, you can have a little hut, etc. But I try to get the parameters so that I don't wander into something that inadvertently turns out to trip over, some movie that's in development, or, some future season of The Mandalorian or whatever, or comics, because it's impossible for anybody who's not on the inside, at Story Group or at Lucasfilm, to possibly know what all these different people are coming up with all the time. So they help with that.
And I mean, of all the books that you've written for Star Wars, I would assume that Bloodline was probably the one that had the most potential to accidentally cross that line into touching on stuff that may be already reserved for other stories, or potentially influencing where those stories are going to go beforehand because of the precedence that your story was going to be setting, just because it was such a critical point in that story leading up to The Force Awakens.
Yeah, and it had to lead into The Force Awakens, and yet I had not seen The Force Awakens, nor are they going to tell me anything about The Force Awakens. Well, not much of anything. They told me that Ben Solo was Kylo Ren and roughly what had happened there, and that Han and Leia had split by the time of the book, but were still together in my book. But that was it. I didn't even know Rey was the main character. That's how much information I didn't have. So, sometimes they'd be like, this scene doesn't work and we can't tell you why. And I'd edit and they'd be like, that's closer. But, and so you just kind of had to find your way. But it still wound up being really, that's one of my favorites of anything that I've gotten to do for Star Wars. So the crunch was well worth it.
Well, I mean, the political thriller nature of it, the breadcrumbs that you continue to put in from the beginning to the end of the story to kind of lead and, or in one case at least, mislead where you think certain characters are going, where their allegiances lie. It really, like, it had me going for a while. Like, I just could not figure a few of it out, and I loved it. I thought it was amazingly well done.
Thank you so much. That's the one that I got the most information for. Before I wrote Star Wars, and even when I got that first email, I thought, well, they'll send me an outline and that's what they want me to do. And that's not it at all. Usually you get like a 2-line prompt and that's about it. But I had about a page of information for that, for Bloodline. And it was all the political stuff. That was all that it touched on. And I remember the first thing I said to my editor, except I didn't say stuff, was Leia's got to blow stuff up. Because don't get me wrong, like, I loved a lot of the old EU, but a lot of times Leia kind of got stuck with the boring part. Luke and Han would be out having big adventures, and Leia was in the Senate, arguing with people, and I was like, yeah, and I was like looking at her in the original trilogy, like, she may be able to function as a diplomat, but her fundamental mode of operation is kicking ass and taking names. That's what she does. And, I tend to be kind of a believer in the fan saying that's out there that's kind of like, Luke is Padme's son, Leia is Anakin's daughter. They kind of have a little bit more personality in common than the father-son link does. So I wanted to play with that specifically and get to do that. But I was like, yeah, we're going to be blowing some stuff up. And, they were great. They were like, sure, blow it up. Way to go. Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, on the creative process side of this, we have to talk about the High Republic. Because I don't know if there's another franchise that has done something as similar to what the story development process for the High Republic has been so far. Like, I can't think of another one that before they start an entirely new series, they announce a new core story group of specific authors. These are the people that are going to be writing it. They're going to work together. They're going to come up with the stories. They're going to make the the vision of what this is. And I think that's a cool idea, but it's also fascinating because they haven't really given a whole lot of detail about how that works. Like, what exactly does that look like for those of you involved with this? That, like, do you get together as a committee and figure out what the overarching story is going to be and then break out to your own books? Do you help each other with your books? How exactly does that work?
It's a lot of different things. I mean, we had our initial story meetings, two at Skywalker Ranch, which were really great, and another one which was in Orlando. So we got to go to the park, which was really cool. So we have the big conferences where all we do is talk story for days, and then we have bi-weekly meetings, Zoom meetings. We were doing those before the pandemic. So when the pandemic came, it's like, okay, we have this down. That's great. Where we would talk things over, and we have a Slack that we speak in, and when new authors came in for phase 2, they joined us there. And so and of course we have a box where you can put outlines and drafts and etc. And we all try to keep up, but it's a whole lot of material. So sometimes you just have to go to somebody and be like, are you killing so-and-so? Because I think I need him, etc. You just have to ask about some of it and work it out. And I'm actually launching into my phase 3 YA book very imminently. I've got a story meeting about the outline tomorrow, as a matter of fact. Nice. But that's getting interesting because everything up to now has been setting stuff up and doing this and putting all these other things in motion. And now this is more about wrapping up some storylines. So it's not less complicated, and it can be really complicated. I will not lie. Like, you think you've gone over everything, but what was it? We had, one Jedi Master had different genders just because, confusion. And I think somebody's lightsaber changed color. You try really hard, but it's a lot of detail. And of course, you're seeing people's different drafts. So if something changes, remembering exactly what the last thing in the draft was can be very tricky. Anyway,
and then of course you have the
it's a constant
ways of telling the story between the adult novels, the YA novels, the comics, the 2-3 different comic series. Trying to keep track of all those different avenues within the overarching story. I can only imagine how chaotic that is.
We keep it in order as best we can, but it is a lot. I mean, I've told people this before, but we were getting so relieved when the books were about to come out. It's like, oh, thank God people have put it on Wikipedia and we could just look it up. We needed fan archivists at work, and it has helped. It has helped that you can go and check these things. Because it's
some dedicated
just
fans.
A lot. Yeah. And we were really worried, are people going to take this trip with us? And a lot of people have, which is awesome. And, at every con I go to, there are people like, oh, I haven't gotten to the High Republic yet. And I'm like, the good thing is it's waiting for you whenever you want to go.
And the fact that it is so detached from the rest of the Star Wars universe, as far as it does not become necessary reading material for you to be able to get to any of the other modern storylines.
Right.
So if you can't get to it yet, it doesn't feel like you're missing something. And so when you do get around to it, it does have its own feeling of enjoyment and accomplishment, because you didn't have to read anything else over here to be able to understand it. So it does give an easier entry point to a lot of new fans that haven't really delved into the larger canon.
Yeah, I like that element of it, that you do get this big interconnected story that has that big epic feeling, but at the same time, it's not like you have to go get every single Star Wars book that comes out to have any idea what's going on, or that you can't come to it later. All the things you just said. Yeah. So
when you guys first came together to be able to start creating this story, how much direction were you all given as far as what does the High Republic arc have to encompass, or is there a specific end point that they are trying to get you to build towards, or did they just give you a general list of here are the things that we want it to include, now go?
No, not even that. They were like, what would you like to do? And
nice.
we came out with the arcs and worked on those things collaboratively and together. They just wanted epic Star Wars. And of course they set the time period, but other than that, there was nothing like that. We really got to come up with the story ourselves.
Nice. And the one thing, just as a purely selfish question for myself, you have the books, you have the comics, and then the High Republic now has a cartoon. Are the cartoon people involved with you guys as well, or are they something entirely different, even though they are technically part of the High Republic?
Entirely different for the most part. Like Cav got to work on an episode, which was great, but for the most part, it's their own thing, and that's fine. And of course, the Acolyte, that's going to be coming out, the live action series. It's later in the High Republic, and even though at least one of our characters is going to show up in it, we haven't worked on that at all. That said, Leslie, who's creating that show, did at least like she took the time to meet us. She's clearly very familiar with the books. So that was great to know, but none of us are on that. Anything like full time. So
my 4-year-old son loves the Young Jedi Adventures, and I was so thrilled to even hear that kind of show for Star Wars was going to be coming out, because I mean, before then you had like Lego Star Wars and stuff that was okay, but maybe not necessarily the most accessible to a 4-year-old. So it really created an easy part of Star Wars for him to connect to, and for the two of us to be able to enjoy together. So
I totally
I think it's a great thing.
I mean, I have loved, the Clone Wars and Rebels and a lot of the Lego stuff, but they've really kind of lacked like animation that is fundamentally for kids, for a fandom and a world that ought to be totally welcoming to kids. So I'm very happy that they've done that, and hopefully there will be more things like that in the future.
Absolutely. Now, I know we are hitting time, but I would be horribly remiss if we did not talk about some of the stuff you have coming up, because I know you have 3 novels in particular that are I didn't realize you had coming out, and I think is just amazing. Of course, the one that's already come out is Haunted Mansion.
Yes.
Which just looks like such a fun story.
It was. And even though I've lived in New Orleans off and on for about 20 years, it's the first book I've ever written set here. So it was fun to get to actually bring some real local color to it.
Nice. So was that something that you were attracted to because of the genre, the location, or was it just the opportunity to be able to write about the legendary haunted mansion for Disney and give your own spin on it?
All of the above, really. It came out of I had a conversation. It was right around the time that we did the launch of the High Republic. And I had a conversation with sort of the head editor. He was like, is there anything besides Star Wars you're interested in? And I was like, I love the Haunted Mansion. And he was like, let's talk. And also he knew that I lived in New Orleans. So I think that gave me a little bit of an in on it as well. And again, everybody knows that the Haunted Mansion is the best one. So that was great to get to do.
Very nice. And then, of course, for all the Jane Austen fans out there, we do have your Mr. Darcy and Miss, I keep stumbling over her name, Tilney, correct?
Tilney.
Good.
Yes.
Okay, good. I usually keep swapping the N and L every time I say your name. But obviously already have 2 books out for that, and the third one is coming out next year.
Yes, the third one is The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And it involves 2 original character sleuths who go through the worlds of these Jane Austen novels where highly impolite murders are taking place. And I've had so much fun writing that series. I cannot even begin to tell you. I'm also launching into that 4th book soon. So, that's been tremendously rewarding, and it's a whole new set of storytelling skills. It's a different prose style. I can't do true Jane Austen style because she was one of the great geniuses of the English language, and I may have great unearned confidence, but not that much. But I want it to feel like it goes with it, that it isn't clashing with it, that it isn't a completely separate thing. So that's a different set of muscles. And plotting murders is, it turns out, a whole different level of complexity from plotting other things, because you have to give clues, but not too many clues. It's a very delicate balance. I'd been an Agatha Christie fan pretty much my whole life, and I knew that she was a great genius, but only after writing it myself and then going back and seeing what she's doing, that I realized, I think she's still the best-selling novelist of all time, by a mile. And I was like, and we see why. She was very, very, very good at it. So, yes, I'm having a lot of fun doing that series, and I hope it will continue past book 4 even. We'll see.
Has diving into the realm of Jane Austen brought a new kind of fan into your, I guess, into your orbit? The traditional Jane Austen fan compared to your fantasy sci-fi fans?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is great, but I joked to my agent once that my brand was, oh God, what's she done now? And my agent did not laugh. So that's where that is. But nice. Even though there's not a lot of crossover between the Austen and the Star Wars, I take the mysteries to comic book conventions, and they actually always sell really well there, because even if Star Wars to that, but a lot of people who are interested in fantasy and sci-fi are also interested in period fiction. The Venn diagram has a lot of overlap. You go to these conventions, and what do you see on the floor? People selling corsets and top hats and other things. There is a connection with those things. And so I always find people who are like, oh, yes, I want to see that. So, but yeah, it is a different crew, and like I said, a different kind of storytelling, and it's been great to be able to do something that new and different.
Yeah, no, it does make sense though, because a lot of people that go to conventions will very easily be able to see the Ren Fair overlap. but it's easy to forget that if you already have one group of period piece fans there, it's not a stretch to have other periods that get represented within the fandoms that are going to be there as well.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the core of genre is we're not here and now in the real world of today, right? And everything that takes you out of that can conceivably touch. So
absolutely. And then, of course, the last book you have coming out, which was the one that I was most fascinated to hear about, was the X-Files. So
yes.
You're writing for the X-Files. That's,
yes.
I mean, awesome.
Yeah, and that was the thing that got me started writing fan fiction. Like I said, you know, I was back on Alt TV X-Files Creative back in the day. So actually having that come full circle was very meaningful in a lot of ways. But it was interesting because, you know, when I was writing that fan fiction, I was just starting out and, you know, frankly, I wasn't very good yet. And it was like, oh, I don't have to get my vibe back. I have to create the vibe with this. So I got to go back and rewatch a ton of it. My husband, he's slightly younger than me, and it's just enough that he hadn't really grown up watching it much. So he was seeing a lot of it for the first time. And it was interesting to get his perspective on it as somebody coming to it fresh. And of course, it is not an uncomplicated canon in any sense.
No.
So it was fun to dig in and really explore that. But I had so much fun doing it. And I think that's supposed to be out in July of next year. I don't think we have a set day yet that it's coming. And yeah, so that brings my X-File. You remember the fans were called X-Files, Philes. Yeah, it brings that experience full circle for me.
Very nice. So, of course, obviously, we have down in the description a link for where everybody can find all your books, link to be able to get them, link to be able to keep up with them if they aren't already out. And definitely encourage everybody, if you have not read any of her books or you've only read a few, go check out a few more. Really, really worth your time. It's just honestly some great stuff. And of course, if people want to be able to follow you with whatever you end up doing next, I know you're on Instagram with @Claudia_Gray.
Yes.
And
I'm on Threads. I've pretty much shuttered my Twitter. I'm also just not super present on social media. I took a step back just for sanity and then was like, oh, this is so nice. But my assistant keeps up some of it, and I'm one of the 12 people left on Tumblr, just reblogging stupid things though. But yeah, if you go to my website, which is badly in need of updating, but it does have links to other things, and like on Instagram or Threads, it'll put up future events that I'm going to. I have a newsletter, even though we're overdue for the next issue. So you could sign up for that there as well. And that'll just kind of let you know where I am about.
Very nice. All right. Well, definitely go follow her. Sign up for that newsletter, because I know you have at least a few conventions already lined up for next year. So
yeah, I'll be doing Awesome Con in DC for one. I am, of course, doing my local con here in New Orleans in January. And I'm doing, I think it's Fan Expo Toronto. I'm coming to Toronto. It's my first ever Canadian event ever. So I am excited to be doing that, but more will come up as we get scheduled.
Nice. Well, guys, you heard it right there. Just a few options for how you might be able to meet Claudia yourself. And otherwise, just keep looking out for her next books. So, Claudia, Thank you so much for your time today. This has been so much fun.
I've had a really great time, and I'm sincere with this offer. When you guys finally decide that you're ready to embrace happiness and watch Andor, I am happy to come and talk about that on a future episode, just as a person who's really watched Andor.
Well, you know what? I think we may have to take you up on that one.
Yeah, please do. As long as I can't talk about anything else, I may as well make the most of it.
Very nice. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. And until next time, I'm Brad with Dallas Geek. That was Claudia Gray. And see ya.